The fundamental goal of a modern economic system is to maintain stable prices for goods and services to prevent negative consequences on the economy. This is reflected in the Central Bank of Nigeria's top mandate of ensuring monetary and price stability, even before responsibilities like issuing currency or managing external reserves. Price stability is measured through the inflation rate, with the aim being to keep it in the single digits, ideally below 9.9%. However, achieving this target has been challenging, with only 40% success since Nigeria's independence. Notably, even at the targeted inflation rate, the naira loses half of its purchasing power every 6 years. With frequent double-digit inflation, this erosion happens much faster. And as people's purchasing power is eroded and they cannot buy what they need, the fabric of social cohesion begins to tear at the seams. This video aims to look at the inflationary trends since independence, as well as policy choices and their outcomes to shed light on effective future inflation control strategies. From promise to war. In the early years of Nigerian independence, 1960 to 1965, the government prioritized economic stability by reducing interest rates and controlling prices through marketing boards, thereby maintaining low inflation. However, political unrest in 1965 disrupted this stability. In 1966, coups and the Nigerian Civil War caused demand and supply collapse. Oil production dropped due to the war, leading to over 100% inflation in 1966 as the government and the people stockpiled for the war. Government revenues fell and debts rose, resulting in deflation from 1967 to 1968. To combat deflation during the war, aggressive monetary expansion caused Nigeria's first double-digit inflation at 10.16% in 1969. This policy persisted until the war's end in 1970. The Roaring 70s. In the early 1970s, Nigeria saw a post-Civil War economic boom fueled by massive government spending on reconstruction, largely funded by surging oil revenues. However, this boom led to a significant rise in inflation, which reached 15.99% in 1971. To combat this, the government introduced price controls in 1971, temporarily reducing inflation to single digits in 1972 at 3.46% and 5.4% in 1973. The influx of oil money fostered a perception of limitless wealth, amplified by the Udoji Award of 1974, which distributed funds to civil servants without a corresponding increase in productivity. Coupled with lingering price controls, inflation climbed again, hitting 12.67% in 1974. In 1975, the government initiated the Third National Development Plan, increasing the money supply, which resulted in an unprecedented 33.96% inflation rate. The private sector faced industrial strikes, further hampering productivity. A coup in 1975 ushered in the Murtala Muhammad regime, which established an anti-inflation task force. Import liberalization and other measures began to curb inflation. By 1977, inflation dropped to 15.08%. General Olusegun Obasanjo assumed power in 1976, and his policies further reduced inflation to 11.7% in 1979. The transition to civilian rule occurred that year, marked by policies promoting productive investment, employment growth, and control of aggregate demand through special deposits on imports. In 1980, inflation fell to 9.97%, marking the first time it reached single digits in 7 years. The 80s, reality begins to bite. In the 1980s, Nigeria faced a series of economic challenges leading to damaging inflation. The 1973 indigenization policy, strengthened in 1977, transferred ownership of enterprises from foreign investors to Nigerians. The 1979 Land Use Act dispossessed landowners of their land rights. Both hindered productivity. Oil, a major revenue source, faced a 2-decade price decline from 1980, while Nigeria's dependency on oil revenues grew. An overvalued naira pegged 1 naira to $1 in 1981, despite evidence of its overvaluation, led to import dependence, balance of payment deficits, and inflation, which surged to 20.8% in 1981. The government responded with import restrictions and exchange rate controls in 1982, briefly lowering inflation to 7.69%. However, inflation rose again to 23.21% in 1983, leading to a cycle of reactive policies rather than addressing root causes. In 1985, General Muhammadu Buhari's government imposed economic controls, significantly reducing demand and supply and lowering inflation to 7.43%. His unpopular rule led to a coup, and General Ibrahim Babangida implemented the Structural Adjustment Program, SAP, in 1986, reducing fiscal deficits and subsidies. While SAP initially lowered inflation to 5.72% in 1986, it brought currency depreciation and erratic inflation rates, which peaked at 54.5% in 1988 and 50.4% in 1989, the highest ever at that time. The 90s, from impoverishing dictators to democracy. The 1990s in Nigeria were marked by severe inflation and economic turmoil. In response to record inflation, the Babangida administration introduced the second-tier foreign exchange market in 1990, creating multiple foreign exchange rates. This disrupted agricultural and production output as imported raw materials became scarce. Prices of goods reliant on imported materials soared and national income dropped, leading to unsold inventories. In 1992, inflation reached 44.59%. The 1993 elections injected massive money into circulation, resulting in an inflation rate of 57.16%. Political instability followed, with the annulment of the acclaimed freest and fairest election in Nigeria's history, leading to changes in government. However, inflation remained high at 57% in 1994 and peaked at a record high of 72.8% in 1995 during General Sani Abacha's rule. Civil unrest, high lending rates, multiple exchange rates, and fiscal indiscipline contributed to this economic crisis. In 1997, aggregate demand hit an all-time low, bringing inflation back to the single digits at 8.53%. This period of low inflation persisted through the transition to democracy under President Olusegun Obasanjo, characterized by a poor economy and limited purchasing power. Nascent democracy. Under President Obasanjo's leadership, Nigeria undertook economic reforms in the early 2000s, including privatization, deregulation, and banking reforms, boosting productivity. In 2001, the CBN did an upward review of the minimum rediscount rate and the cash reserves requirements of commercial banks to manage liquidity. And in 2003, it allowed the market to determine the liquidity and exchange rate markets for the first time in 23 years. Obasanjo obtained debt forgiveness for the country in 2005. However, structural issues like oil dependency, high energy costs, and infrastructure problems kept inflation in the double digits until 2006, when the monetary policy rate introduced stabilized prices and reduced inflation. By 2007, inflation had dropped to 5.4%, the lowest since 1972. In 2007, the Obasanjo administration introduced key legislation prioritizing price stability and reducing excessive borrowing, the CBN Act and the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The transition to President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua saw some policy reversals, causing inflation to rise to 11.6% in 2008. President Goodluck Jonathan succeeded President Yar'Adua in 2010. The last decade, global and local recessions. President Jonathan, faced with double-digit inflation, adopted tight monetary policies from 2010 to 2011, increasing the MPR and CRR to reduce inflation. These measures tightened the money supply, leading to single-digit inflation of 8.5% by 2013. In 2014, before the 2015 general elections, the monetary policy rate and cash reserve ratio were further increased to maintain low inflation despite increased government spending. The return of highly skilled Nigerians from the diaspora post the 2008 global economic crisis boosted productivity and consumption, making Nigeria's economy the largest in Africa. However, energy subsidies and the determination to keep the naira strong remained problematic, leading to fiscal issues and consumption imbalances. In 2015, Muhammadu Buhari was elected president just as oil prices began to decline rapidly. He inherited economic challenges and policy dilemmas. Inflation increased to 15.7% in 2016 from 9.01% in 2015. Since 2016, Nigeria has maintained double-digit inflation rates ranging from 11.4% in 2019 to 13.3% in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic that struck the entire world. The economy faced a recession in 2020 owing to the lockdown and a downturn in economic activities. Despite the recovery from the pandemic in 2021, the inflation rate increased to 17%. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia in early 2022 led to a global economic crisis that saw food and energy prices surge. Nigeria was not left out, as inflation further increased to 18.9% in 2022, which seems to be the beginning of a long economic crisis, given that the fact that the months of 2023 have been characterized by high inflation values. Nigeria's last recorded inflation figure was 24.08% in July 2023, the highest since September 2005.